والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We're in the session of Fiqh, and we talk inshallah ta'ala in this session about Alghusl. Alghusl, which is one of the means of purification, that if a person is in a certain state, and as it will be mentioned inshallah ta'ala, then it's mandatory to make ghusl. You will keep it as ghusl. You don't want to say shower. It will be ghusl, inshallah ta'ala, with the definition of ghusl. Before we start, we talked before about the importance of learning matters of fiqh, the rulings about how to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the relationship between that and the tawheed and the oneness of worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the first pillar of Islam. That we do the acts of worship for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, that we turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone in matters of worship, not according to what we think, but according to the way of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And as we see, there is no such a thing as intellect or intellectual abilities getting into these types of things. We just nothing but slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We listen and we obey. We made the decision, and we stated the fact that He subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only one worthy of worship, and He subhanahu wa ta'ala also the one that would order us how to worship Him, and that is according to the way of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And on our personal level, it's very important that we increase our iman with these matters of worship. And when we know that we're supposed to do the obligations in the most perfect way, this is the way to seek the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to fulfill the obligations in the most perfect way. Because the obligations are the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves the most. That's why He made it obligatory on us. So the more the person will perfect it, the more the person will do it in the most perfect way, not just to make salah, but to establish the salah with its pillars and obligations and recommended acts in the houses of Allah, in jama'ah, and so on. And for the believers, this is not the end of it. This is not it. Because the way of the Prophet ﷺ was not just that he would do the obligations and that's it. And when we keep on saying we need to follow the way of the Prophet ﷺ, we need to follow the way of the Prophet ﷺ, it's not just in matters of aqidah, it's also in matters of fiqh, in manners, in purification of our souls, in all of our affairs, in our relationships, in literally in everything in our life. We have to make sure that before we do anything, we have to make sure that we know the way of the Prophet ﷺ. And one of which is our personal ibadah. Do we have every day the portion of the Quran that we recite? The portion of the Quran that we need to memorize, right? And again, it doesn't have to be something that is too long, something that can be very short, one line, half a line, a verse, anything. But for the Muslim to be in the habit or in the system of memorizing the Quran, and intentions goes beyond our actions. Reciting the Quran daily, having the Sunnah Salah and the optional Salah and the night prayer. These are things that we should never miss, and the same thing with fasting and so on. This is the way to purify ourselves, this is the way to increase our iman. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bless everything else in our life, and one of which of course is to learn how to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And once a person is in the age to reach the age of puberty, it's mandatory to learn these rulings. So the chapter or the matters of ghusl, he says باب ما يوجب الغسل وصفته, what makes the ghusl mandatory, وصفته. And again, we're learning Arabic and fiqh at the same time. So bab, chapter, bab means door also, right? So this is like the door to enter into a subject. ما يوجب الغسل, from واجب, ما يوجب, what necessitates or made it mandatory, الغسل. And الغسل is not shower. الغسل is تعميم البدن بالماء, that you would make the whole body washed with water, with المضمضة والاستنشاق, with making المضمضة, having water in the mouth and you move it and you spit it out, and also your nose, with both. Although the mouth and the nose has some differences of opinions, right? But we'll talk about this. So this is not the session where we talk about all the differences of opinions, but we'll keep it at this definition. Mainly the Ahnaf and the Hanabila, the Imam Hanifa. The Madhab al-Rahman, they make it mandatory that you make the madmada and istinshaq, right? And this is what is more correct. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, because the head or the face that is mentioned in the Quran, it says the face when it comes to making wudu, which is one of the pillars of the wudu. And the way that we know the face is what we see one another. The thing that you see from the face of another, from where usually the hair grows to the end of the chin and from one ear to the other. But the mouth and the nose is also part of the face. And when we see the action of the Prophet ﷺ, he never left al-madmada wal-istinshaq. He never left the mouth and the nose in wudu, and also in ghusl. He would make wudu alayhi salatu wasalam. So that means it's part of the pillars of the wudu and also the ghusl. So the definition of ghusl is to wash the whole body with water, with the madmada, the mouth, and the nose. But first he says, wajib al-ghuslu min. Ghusl becomes wajib, mandatory, from certain things. The first thing is al-janabah. Al-janabah, what's the definition of al-janabah? إنزال المني بوطء أو غيره. When al-mani, the seminal fluid, would go out بوطء, whether it's sexual intercourse or without it. Anytime it comes out of the body of the person, that means ghusl is mandatory. And this is whether it's from the man or from the woman. And they're both, this is valid for both of them. أو بالتقاء الختانين. The second thing that makes ghusl mandatory, if the two khitan, al-khitanayn, they meet. Al-khitan comes the word meaning circumcision. So when the two circumcised meet, which basically when the man and woman would have sexual intercourse, right? Even without having the name discharged, without discharge, still ghusl becomes mandatory. If there's intercourse without any discharge, still it's mandatory. And what makes it mandatory? Once the khitanayn, the circumcised organs, they meet, or it's basically the meaning of intercourse itself. The third, this is basically al-janabah. So the two is under the janabah. The inzal of al-mani, seminal fluid is discharged, or with the khitanayn being met. The second thing, خروج دم الحيض والنفاس. خروج, coming out, dam, blood. الحيض والنفاس, الحيض is the menses, and النفاس is the after-birth bleeding. So these two types of bleeding from the woman, first we mentioned it before that this is from the najasat, this is from the impurities, this blood is impure. The normal blood, we discussed it, there is differences of opinion whether it's pure or impure, and we said that the most correct opinion, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, that the normal blood is pure, because there's no clear evidence that would state that it's impure. But with the consensus, of course, that the blood of the menses and the after-birth bleeding, both are impure, najis. So the najasa is something physical, right, that has to be purified from. But the ruling here when it comes to what necessitates the ghusl is the dam when the blood will come out. And this is one of the issues, and not to get into the details of it, but to see how precise the people of knowledge are. They talked about what makes the ghusl mandatory in that case. Is it the blood when it comes out from the beginning of it, or when it's finished, when the woman is purified from this? What makes the ghusl mandatory? Because of course if the blood comes down, she's not supposed to go make ghusl, because she's not supposed to make salah. So why would they say khuruj dam al-hayd? Why can't they say the end of the dam of al-hayd? It should have been said when the hayd is finished, then the ghusl is mandatory. So they say it's when the blood comes out. Because once the blood comes out, it's mandatory for her to make ghusl, but when she is clean from it. So khuruj dam al-hayd wal-nufas, both have the same ruling. And the subject of al-hayd is still a chapter to come, inshallah. Number 3, وَمَوْتُ غَيْرِ الشَّهِيدِ, the death of other than the martyr, other than the shaheed. Because death makes it mandatory for the person to be washed. It's not his responsibility. Right now, after a person dies, he's being washed by others. So it's mandatory on the Muslims. And this is one of the furud of al-kifayat. means that the Muslims, in a collective manner, they have to wash the dead among them. If they don't, they all are falling into the sin. Some group of them, somebody, as if a Muslim died, right, and if all Muslims says, we can't do it, I don't know how to do it, and then they end up just burying the person without washing him, the whole community falls into the sin. They have to do something. Either they know how to do it, or they teach somebody how to do it, or they have to, whatever. Somebody has to wash this dead person, otherwise they all fall into the sin. So that's why it's mandatory for some to learn how to wash the dead so that they don't leave the Muslims dying without washing them. الشهيد, the martyr, what's meant by the shaheed in the ma'araka, in the battlefield. Not the shaheed as a result of drowning or a disease in the stomach or a building collapse or anything, because the Prophet ﷺ, he said that the shuhada in his ummah, the martyrs are not just those who die in the battlefield, but also those who die as drowning or in burning or with disease in their stomach. They get the same reward as the shaheed, but they don't get the same worldly rules as the shaheed. And one of the worldly rules for the shaheed is that he's not to be washed. Right? He is to be buried with his clothes like this, without any kafan, without any washing or anything. So that's why he says, وَمَوْتُ غَيْرِ الشَّهِيدِ, because the shaheed is not to be washed. Number 4, وَإِسْلَامُ الْكَافِرِ. The kafir, the disbeliever, become a Muslim, then he has to take a shower. Right? But what comes first? Is his shower, or his ghusl, or his Islam? His Islam comes first. And that's why you should not delay the Islam of a person till he go take his shower. He comes and he wants to say the Shahada, no brother, you can do that now. You have to go take a shower first. What if he dies on the way or whatever? No, he says the Shahada, right? And then you tell him to go take the shower, take a ghusl, right? And again, the ghusl is so easy, there's no rituals to it. Or the fard, or the minimum requirement for ghusl is the whole body to be washed with water and with the mouth and the nose, with, of course, the intention as it will come, which is one of the pillars of al-ghusl. Because people take showers. Would that be considered as ghusl or not? What differentiates the ghusl from showers is the intention. And the intention or the niyyah is in the heart, has nothing to do with the tongue. So you don't have to say anything, you don't have to stop and think and make a decision in your mind. There's no such a thing. In your heart, you know that you're doing this for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to relieve yourself from the state of al-janabah, or from the blood of the haid or nifas, to make salah and so on and so forth. Or a person becoming a Muslim, so he will take the shower with that intention. Then he mentioned some of the evidences after mentioning these 4 things that makes ghusl mandatory. So what are they? The first thing is al-janabah. And al-janabah is from 2 things. From the discharge of the mani, whether it's in a permissible way or haram way, right? And the intercourse, even without discharge. Number 2 is the blood of the haid and the nufas, menses and afterbirth bleeding. Number 3, the death of other than the shaheed. And number 4, Islam al-kafir, the kafir becomes Muslim. قال تعالى وَإِن كُنْتُمْ جُنُبًا فَطَهَّرُوا. If you are junub, then you make tahara, the order from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this tahara is a complete one, which means to take ghusl. وقال تعالى ولا تقربوهن حتى يطهرن فإذا تطهرن فأتوهن من حيث أمركم الله. For the men not to approach their wives, meaning in sexual intercourse, till they are purified, till they are clean from their menses. فإذا تطهرن فأتوهن. Not that the blood stop coming down, no, it's after they take the ghusl. So if the woman is clean, it is not permissible for a husband to have intimate relationship with her till she takes the ghusl. And say there is no water, for example, then the tayammum comes in place, then it's permissible, as far as the permissibility is concerned. But she has to be in the state of tahara, complete tahara, for that time. And then that's what he says, أي إذا اغتسل. That means when they take their ghusl. وقد أمر النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم بالغسل من تغسيل الميت. And the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم ordered for the one that washes the dead to take a shower or to take ghusl. This order, some said, as we mentioned it before, it's only recommended, and some they said it's mandatory, although it's not mentioned here, right? So whether he meant by maut ghayr al-shaheed that death makes it obligatory to take a shower for the one that washed the body, or of course it means the dead body itself. but it's not mandatory on the deceased, it's mandatory for those who are alive. Unless the deceased knew that he's in an environment where people do not know these rulings, then it becomes mandatory for him to say that to somebody. If he is in a state of forgetfulness or something like that, he can be responsible. And then he says, وَأَمَرَ مَنْ أَسْلَمَ أَنْ يَغْتَسِلَ. The Prophet ﷺ ordered the ones that became Muslim to take a shower or to take ghusl. Then the next issue, صِفَةُ غُسْلِ النَّبِيِّ صلى الله عليه وسلم من الجنابة. What is the way of the Prophet ﷺ to make ghusl from al-janabah? We said the mandatory is to wash the whole body with the madmada and with istinshaq the mouth and the nose. But the perfect way is the way of the Prophet ﷺ. If a person immerses himself into the sea or in the swimming pool or whatever there is with the intention that he's making ghusl, and he comes out with the madmada and istinshaq the mouth and the nose, it's valid. He can go make salah, no problem whatsoever. But the most perfect way is to do it according to the way of the Prophet ﷺ, and that is in this order. And this is mentioned in more than one hadith, in which the Prophet ﷺ says, number one, فَكَانَ يَغْسِلُ فَرْجَهُ أَوَّلًا. He used to wash his farj أولا, the private part to be washed first. ثُمَّ يَتَوَضَّأُ وُضُوءًا كَامِلًا. Then he would make a complete wudu. And since this book is supposed to be summarized for a person, a beginner, to learn how to make the matters of ibadah, some of these issues will have, of course, some details to it. Is it a complete wudu or it's a wudu without washing the foot? There's a hadith that gives both meanings. So it's either way. Either a person would make a complete wudu, like you would normally do, or there's some narrations where the Prophet ﷺ made wudu, but didn't wash his foot, right? And in another narrations that he made a wudu without washing the foot, and he washed it at the end. So there's three cases here. Wudu complete in the beginning, after washing the private part, or wudu without washing the foot, and washing it at the end. And the third case, to make wudu without washing the foot, and that's it. Because anyway, the water will come down and the foot will be washed anyway. Doesn't mean that the foot not to be washed, but it's just a matter of the perfect way of doing it. And some went into the details when they looked closely to the hadith. They said if a person is taking a shower in a place where the water will be gathered and it rises, right, and it will cover his feet, right, in that case he should wash his foot at the end after he finishes, and all kinds of details. But to take it at this level, to make wudu after washing the private part. ثم يحفي الماء على رأسه ثلاثا يرويه بذلك. ثم يحفي الماء على رأسه. So after making wudu, the Prophet ﷺ used to wash his head. يرويه بذلك. يرويه from when you irrigate the land, right, to make sure that it has water, the same thing. You're irrigating basically your head, meaning that the water reaches the roots of your head if you have big hair or long hair. It means that the water has to go deep. So you do that with your head. It's not wiping, of course. It's not just putting or throwing some water like the women would do, because the women, they have a certain ruling as it will come, inshallah ta'ala. But for men, if it's from Janabah, right, and from the person has to wash his head and the water has to reach the roots of his hair. So this is after the wudu, washing the head good, thoroughly, so that it reaches the head. That's if a person is sick, then he can make the amr. We will talk about the exceptions, inshallah. So washing the head. Then ثم يفيض الماء على سائر جسده. Then he would pour the water over the rest of his body. There is some details to it. The Prophet ﷺ would do the right part of his body first, and then the left part. The right part, top and bottom, and then the left, top and bottom. Right? And then the rest of the body, and making sure that water reaches every part of his body. Then he says, ثم يغسل رجليه بمحل آخر. Then he washes his foot in another place, other than what he was standing, making the shower. And this is also one of the things that has differences of opinion. This is the most perfect way to be away from all differences of opinion. But if a person doesn't do this, the shower is valid, the ghusl is valid if he doesn't do this. But he says, ثم يغسل رجليه بمحل آخر, in a different place. This is the way of the ghusl of the Prophet ﷺ. So he washing the private part first, and then the wudu, and and then after that washing the head, and then the whole body, the right part first, and then the left part, then the rest of the body with water, and then to wash the foot in separate place. And then he says, وَالْفَرْضُ مِنْ هَذَا, and the fard from all of what is mentioned is غسل جميع البدن وما تحت الشعور الخفيفة والكثيفة والله أعلم. The fard from this is to wash the whole body and what under the hair, if there is any hair, whether it's thick or light, to make sure that the water reaches the skin, right? And that's the fard. And there's nothing else needed in this case. So this is the fard of the tayammum. Again, the most perfect way is to do the way of the Prophet ﷺ, as we heard. Tayammum is the next chapter, right? But very briefly, if someone is sick, it's very cold and there's no means to heat the water, right? Then the person can make tayammum in this case. So for example, if he's not able to take the ghusl altogether, then to make tayammum, and that's validate anything that a person wants to do. Tayammum comes into the same level as making ghusl or making wudu. And the famous hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, when some of the companions were traveling, and one of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, he was wounded in his head. And when they slept, he woke up and he was ala ihtilam, and he became in state of Janabah, right? He had a wet dream. So he asked the people what to do. They told him, we have nothing to tell you, but we have to take a ghusl. You have to take ghusl. He took the ghusl and he died. The Prophet ﷺ said, قَتَلُوهُ قَتَلَهُ اللَّهُ. They killed him. Ya Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala treat them the same way. هَلَّا سَأَلُوا. Shouldn't they ask? فَإِنَّمَا شِفَاءُ الْعَلِيِّ السُّؤَالِ. He said that the shifa, the cure for those who are ignorant is to ask, right? Which is a famous hadith in many benefits to be learned from it, and one of which we cannot just say things about matters of the Deen without knowledge. We have to ask, or a person has to be a seeker of knowledge, and then he asks. So, and the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that al-jahl, or ignorance, is a disease. Ignorance is disease. And how to lift this disease from us is by learning. And this is our original status as human beings. And that's why human beings tend to be arrogant. Nobody would ever say about himself that he's jahil, he's ignorant. People would never say that about themselves. But in reality, we're all in that state till we do something. So we do not learn matters of Deen, for example, by seeing how things are around us, right? And whether we are in the 20th century or 21st century, then things will be different than it was in the 19th century or whatever. This is not how we learn the Deen. Even you would find that very clear in many of our situations in matters of Deen. I'm not talking about matters of fiqh only, but matters of halal and haram. To people, this is halal or this is haram, according to how he was raised, his culture, what he saw with his own eyes, and he saw many righteous people, for example, doing one thing or the other. So this is how the Deen is. This is not how the Deen is. The Deen is Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and each person, any person can fall into mistakes. So to lift that state of ignorance, we have to do something, and that is learning matters of the Deen. The same thing with matters of Aqidah. How many of us as Muslims learn our belief? We think that belief comes by default like this. You had it somehow, sometime. If you didn't take the time to learn it, that means you might have a distorted belief and you do not know. Because belief is something that is dependent on the ghaib, something that is ghaib, unseen to us. And the unseen is to be known by the wahy, revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. So what is more important in our life than to take the time to learn matters of the Deen, especially that certain matters of knowledge, there's no excuse of not knowing it, to learn it based on the Quran and the way the Prophet ﷺ and the sayings of the people of knowledge and so on. We're not talking about everybody to be a scholar in the Deen, but there is minimum requirement for every Muslim to learn. One of which, for example, Muslim. Many people, they're embarrassed to teach their children, for example, these matters, and they grow up and they become an age where they're about to experience these things. So they would be embarrassed to teach them or to tell them, and you would find people would make salah with their state of Janabah, for example. Or the child wakes up in the morning and he has to take a shower. And he's embarrassed to do that because people would think something about him. So he doesn't, and he might go to the masjid even with his father and make Salatul Fajr. Right? So that's why these things, there's no shyness in matters of the religion, and these are facts of life. It's not something that is evil or anything like this. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the proper understanding of matters of the Deen. With regarding to if the water is cold, for example, that there's no means to heat it, then the person will make tayammum. What if a person is wounded, and the wound is just in one organ, right? Like say in his knees, for example, right? And he cannot wash his knees. So should he make tayammum and never wash his body whatsoever? If he has means to cover that part that needs to be covered, then he should cover it, right? And wash the rest of the body, and still make tayammum for that part that he could not wash. The same thing for wudu. So he would make ghusl. What if the lower part under his knees, his shin, for example, is fine, but he would not be able to wash it, for example, because of the position of the knee? Then it's okay. Then he doesn't have to hurt himself, of course, in that case. He can avoid washing it, and he would wash the rest of the body, or avoid washing the whole leg, for example. Right? There's no problem if he has the fear that this would hurt him. And in that case, he would still make the tayammum after he made the ghusl. And the tayammum, as we will see, just one hit on what is originally from the ground, one hit only, and then washing or wiping the face and the back of the hands, and that's it. It's not to the elbows, it's only the palm only. And since he hit it on the ground, as we will see from the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, already the part which is the palm inside, it hit the ground, so you don't have to wipe that anymore. So you just one hit like this, and you can let the dust goes off if there's anything in your hand, and then you wipe the face only one time, and the back of the hand, and that's it. Right? So this is an act of worship. And the ruling of tayammum, there are many what to do, the water comes and so on, but this is the next chapter, inshallah. So we'll stop at this point with the ghusl, and we'll continue inshallah next time with the tayammum. And if you have questions, please go ahead.
Said like for the men